On Sunday, the 26th of July, China ran two weather emergencies at the same time, about 1,500 kilometers apart. The first was the strongest typhoon to strike the country this year, making landfall before dawn on a coastline holding more than 100 million people. The second was a stream in a narrow valley that rose in the middle of a Sunday afternoon. The typhoon killed essentially nobody in the province it hit. The stream killed 10. I want to put those two facts next to each other and leave them there for a second, because almost every instinct you have about disaster response points the wrong way here. The enormous, headline-generating, satellite-tracked event was survivable. The small, local, barely reported one was not. That difference was not luck. It was not a story about one province being better prepared than another. Both were handled by the same national system, under the same government, in the same week, and both were assigned the same lowest tier national response. The variable that decided who lived was time. Specifically, about 72 hours in one case, and something closer to 10 minutes in the other. In the next 20 minutes, I'll take you through both events, show you exactly where the warning time comes from, and why it differs so enormously between two kinds of water, explain what a country can and cannot do with each amount, and identify where the Chinese system genuinely is under strain. Because there is a real answer to that, and it isn't the one in the headlines. Let's take them in order. The first event began days before it arrived, which is the whole point. Typhoon Noul had already crossed the Philippines earlier in the week, where at least 3 people died. It tracked northwest across the South China Sea, past Taiwan, and by Saturday it was intensifying, with Hong Kong's observatory measuring maximum sustained winds near 90 miles an hour. Saturday evening, China's National Meteorological Center issued a red typhoon warning, the highest level in a 4-tier color system, and the first red typhoon alert issued anywhere in the country in 2026. At around 10 minutes to 4 on Sunday morning, Noul made landfall at Huidong County, in Huizhou, Guangdong Province, with winds up to 162 kilometers an hour. Then it weakened quickly, dropping to tropical storm strength as it moved inland. The alert was stepped down to orange, then to yellow, through the day. The reported damage was uprooted trees in Huilai County, a partially collapsed scaffolding structure on a Hong Kong high-rise, and rain across southern Guangdong and southeastern Fujian. Hong Kong reported at least 9 people injured. Around 1,800 flights were grounded across the affected region, and high-speed rail across Guangdong was canceled for the day. And according to Xinhua, more than 801,000 people in Guangdong had been relocated for safety by Sunday. 2 days earlier, that figure had been around 340,000, which means roughly 500,000 people were moved in the final stretch. Afterwards, the National Commission for Disaster Prevention, Reduction and Relief activated a Level 4 response for the province, the lowest of 4 national tiers. The National Development and Reform Commission allocated 100 million yuan, about 14.8 million US dollars, for recovery. Now the second event. At around 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, in the Shuangshimen Scenic area in Weiwan County, Dingxi City, Gansu Province, inland, northwest, roughly 1,200 kilometers from Beijing and far outside anything the typhoon touched. Short-duration heavy rainfall in the mountains produced what Chinese media described as a mountain torrent. It came down a narrow valley into a scenic area full of people camping on a summer weekend. 305 firefighters and rescue personnel were deployed with 68 emergency vehicles. Local police and fire teams searched vehicles for people trapped inside them. By 6 o'clock that evening, the toll stood at 10 dead and 23 injured. 174 people were rescued. The State Flood Control and Drought Relief Headquarters, with the Ministry of Emergency Management, sent a work team to Gansu and activated a Level 4 flood prevention response for the province. 2 events. Same day. Same lowest response tier. Wildly different outcomes. So here is the variable. A typhoon is one of the most visible things on Earth. It is a weather system hundreds of kilometers across, sitting on open ocean, tracked continuously by geostationary satellites, aircraft, buoys, and radar. Forecasters can see it forming days before it threatens anyone, watch it organize, and project its track with increasing confidence as it approaches. By the time Noul was a day out from Guangdong, its landfall zone was known to within a manageable margin. That gave the Chinese system somewhere in the region of 72 hours of actionable warning. Not perfect information, but enough to act on with confidence. A mountain torrent gives you almost nothing. The rainfall that produces one is convective, localized, intense, and short. A single storm cell parks over one catchment in a mountain range and empties itself in under an hour across an area a few kilometers wide. Forecasters can tell you that conditions across a large mountainous region are favorable for intense downpours. They cannot tell you which of several hundred valleys will receive the cell, or at what hour. And once it starts, the clock is brutal. Rain falling across a steep catchment concentrates into the valley floor within minutes. From the moment a torrent begins in the upper catchment to the moment it reaches a site a few kilometers downstream, you may have somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes. 72 hours against 10 minutes. That is the entire difference, and everything else follows from it. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to hear that as an excuse. It isn't one. It is a description of what the two kinds of water physically permit, and it explains why the response to each looks so different. Consider what 72 hours buys you. 800 and 1,000 relocations is not a warning. It is a logistics operation on the scale of moving a mid-sized city. It requires identifying which villages, fishing communities, low-lying districts, and construction sites fall inside the projected zone. It requires shelters, schools, gymnasiums, community halls, designated and stocked in advance. It requires transport, and the transport has to finish moving people before conditions make roads impassable. Which means the whole operation must complete hours before the storm arrives, not as it arrives. It also requires the authority to compel people to leave. Evacuation orders in China are not advisory in the way they often are elsewhere, and whatever you think of that as a general principle, on a weekend in July in Guangdong, it is the reason the death toll is what it is. Now consider what 10 minutes buys you. Essentially nothing that involves organizing people. And the geometry makes it worse. A person standing in a narrow valley cannot see the sky above the catchment feeding it. The rain that kills you in a mountain torrent often falls kilometers upstream, out of sight, and it may not be raining where you are standing at all. This is the single most counterintuitive fact about these events, and it accounts for a large share of the deaths worldwide. People are caught in bright conditions beside a stream that looks completely normal. Add the communications problem. Deep mountain valleys are precisely where mobile coverage fails. A push alert sent to every phone in the county does not reach the campsite at the bottom of the gorge. So on Sunday afternoon, a system that had just successfully relocated 800,000 people from a coastline had no meaningful mechanism to reach a few hundred campers in a canyon. Because the physics of the hazard did not allow one, that is why the outcomes diverged. Not competence. Lead time. Now, is the Chinese system under strain? There is a real answer, and it is worth separating from the noise. Noul was the third typhoon to make landfall in China within a single month after Bavi and Maysak. That compression is the genuine pressure point, and for a reason that has nothing to do with wind speed. Emergency response capacity is finite. The same provincial teams, the same shelters, the same stockpiles, the same drainage systems, and the same repair crews handle each event in turn. Spaced across a season, the system recovers between them. Arriving in close succession, each event lands on ground that has not dried, infrastructure that has not been fully repaired, and personnel who have not rested. Saturated soil is the clearest illustration. Rainfall that would drain harmlessly into dry ground runs straight off ground that is already full. So the same rain produces more flooding on the second storm than the first, and more again on the third. Nothing about the weather changed. The ground underneath it did. Running two concurrent level 4 responses in different provinces is not, in itself, evidence of a system at its limit. Level 4 is the lowest tier precisely because it does not require the heaviest national mobilization. But 3 landfalls in 30 days, entering the historical peak of the Western Pacific typhoon season in August and September, is a real load, and it is the thing worth watching rather than any individual storm. There is one more failure in this story, and it is not China's. A significant number of outlets reported the 10 Gansu deaths under typhoon headlines. Typhoon Noul kills 10 in China. The Associated Press and ABC News reported the two events separately and clearly, but because both stories carried the words China, rain, flooding, and deaths, and because both landed in the same news cycle, they were fused. It is a compression error, not a conspiracy, and it happens constantly with fast-moving disaster coverage. But it does real damage to public understanding, because it produces exactly the wrong lesson. If you believe Noul killed 10 people in Guangdong, you conclude that a typhoon hit China and some people died, which is unremarkable. If you understand that the typhoon killed almost nobody, and a stream killed 10, you are forced to ask why, and the answer is genuinely useful. So let me be direct about what this weekend does and does not show. It does not show a country overwhelmed. Both events were assessed at the lowest national response tier by the government's own commission, and the funding allocated for Guangdong recovery was around $15 million, a serious sum for cleanup, and nowhere near what a devastated province would require. It does not show cities flattened or millions trapped. The reported physical damage from Noul was trees, scaffolding, flooding, and canceled transport. The 801,000 figure describes people moved out of danger, which is the opposite of trapped, and it is good news that is frequently reported as though it were bad, and it does not show anything engineered. Both events are ordinary meteorology for late July, a typhoon forming in the Western Pacific warm pool at the seasonal peak, and convective thunderstorms over mountains in summer. The energy involved in either exceeds anything human technology can direct by margins that are difficult to express. But it also does not show a country that has solved the problem, and this is where I part company with the reassuring reading. 10 people died in a valley on a Sunday afternoon in a country with one of the most capable mass evacuation systems in the world. They died because the hazard that killed them operates on a timescale that no evacuation system can match, and because the site they were standing in had been developed for tourism in exactly the kind of terrain that produces those events. That is the uncomfortable part. The features that make a scenic gorge beautiful, narrow walls, dramatic rock, clear mountain streams, are the visible signature of a catchment that moves a great deal of water very fast. The valley is beautiful because it was carved, and it was carved by what happened on Sunday. Domestic tourism in China has expanded enormously over 2 decades, and camping specifically has grown sharply in recent years. That puts far more people into upland valleys during storm season than were there a decade ago. The hazard has not changed. The exposure has. The interventions that work against that are unglamorous and cheap, where you site a campsite within a valley, how much elevation above the channel you require, whether upstream rain gauges feed a local siren rather than a national app, whether visitors are told on arrival what a distant roar means and which direction to run, uphill and away from the channel, immediately, not along the valley floor. None of that requires better forecasting. All of it works inside a 10-minute window, which is the only window you get. Here is what I'll be watching over the coming days. The first is the final Gansu toll. 10 was accurate as of 6 o'clock Sunday evening. Numbers after mountain torrents move, because people are carried downstream and search areas expand along the channel. Watch for a missing persons count reported separately from confirmed deaths. That is the better predictor of where the total lands. The second is whether either level 4 response is escalated. That is the clearest available signal that a damage assessment came back worse than the initial read. The third is the findings of the work team dispatched to Gansu. Investigations after events like this typically address whether warnings were issued, whether the site had an evacuation plan, and whether facilities were sited appropriately relative to the channel. Whether those findings are published, and in what detail, tells you how the incident is being treated. The fourth is rainfall across both regions this week. Saturated and destabilized ground fails more readily on subsequent rain, and the days after an event are when secondary incidents happen, in the same catchments. The fifth is what forms next in the Western Pacific. 3 landfalls in a month is already an unusual cadence, and August and September are historically the strongest months of the season. I want to end on the contrast, because I think it is the most useful thing anyone can take from last weekend. At 4 in the morning on Sunday, on the Guangdong coast, a typhoon came ashore into a province that had already emptied the ground in front of it. Buses had run, shelters had opened, boats had come into harbor, trains had stopped. Somebody had made a list of which communities sat inside the projected zone, and somebody else had gone out to them. It was the least watchable form of disaster response there is. It generated no footage anyone will remember. And it is the reason the death toll was what it was. 10 hours later, and 1,500 kilometers inland, a few hundred people were camping beside a stream in a valley on their day off. Somewhere above them, out of sight beyond a ridge, it started raining hard. Most of them got out. 305 rescuers came up the road and pulled 174 people out alive. 10 did not get out. The country did not fail on Sunday. It did the thing it is good at, extremely well, and then ran into the thing that nobody is good at yet. We'll be watching for the final figures.